Let me ask you something quietly. If your income doubled tomorrow, would your discipline double? Or would your lifestyle? Pause. Don't answer quickly, because your first instinct reveals more than your ambition ever will. There are people who earn more than you and still feel financially trapped. There are people who work harder than you and remain average. There are people who know more than you and never escape survival mode. So what's missing? It's not intelligence. It's not access. It's not information. It's identity. You are not stuck because you lack opportunity. You are stuck because your identity is calibrated for comfort. That sentence probably made you slightly uncomfortable. Good. Discomfort is where awareness begins. You say you want wealth, but you also want safety. You say you want success, but you also want approval. You say you want growth, but you don't want to outgrow anyone. And that conflict is expensive, because wealth is not blocked by your ambition. It is blocked by the emotional patterns you protect. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your identity. And identity is invisible. That's what makes this dangerous. You defend your current income level. You defend your environment. You defend your spending habits. You defend your excuses. You defend your comfort. Not because you're lazy, but because your nervous system is trained for familiarity. And familiarity feels safe, even when it keeps you small. Let's tell the truth. If hard work guaranteed wealth, every exhausted person would be rich. If intelligence guaranteed wealth, every educated person would be financially free. If knowledge guaranteed wealth, every podcast listener would be building assets. But they're not. Because money does not respond to effort alone. It responds to structure. And structure requires emotional maturity. Money amplifies who you already are. If you are impulsive, more money makes you more impulsive. If you seek validation, more money increases your need to display it. If you fear visibility, more money increases your anxiety. If you avoid responsibility, more money increases your pressure. And pressure exposes identity. That's why many people subconsciously avoid wealth. Not because they don't want it, but because they don't want the exposure it brings. Exposure of your discipline, your patience, your emotional control, your ability to delay gratification, your ability to tolerate silence, your ability to outgrow people. Wealth is not just income. It is responsibility. It is expectation. It is visibility. It is pressure. And pressure feels threatening if your identity is built on emotional survival instead of strategic growth. So instead of rising, you recalibrate downward. You spend to regulate stress. You chase urgency to feel progress. You compare instead of build. You start. You stop. You restart. You say you'll get serious next month. You defend your ceiling without realizing it. This audiobook is not about hacks. It is not about trends. It is not about secret investment strategies. It is about the invisible ceiling you protect. The emotional patterns blocking your success. The identity that keeps you financially average. Over the next 2 hours, we will confront why you defend your income level, why comfort feels safer than growth, why responsibility scares you more than failure, why validation costs more than investment, why urgency feels productive but destroys compounding, why scarcity becomes self-fulfilling, and how to rebuild your wealth identity from the inside out. This will not feel motivational. It will feel revealing. Because the moment you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. And once you see it, you either change it or you defend it. That choice is yours. But understand this clearly. You are not stuck because you lack money. You are stuck because you haven't become the person who can hold it. And today, we begin that shift. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The identity you're protecting. You believe you want more. More money. More freedom. More success. But your behavior tells a different story. Because every time your income begins to stretch, every time you start to gain momentum, every time you feel yourself moving forward, something subtle happens. You recalibrate. Not consciously, emotionally. You upgrade your lifestyle faster than your discipline. You reward yourself before you secure yourself. You expand expenses before you expand assets. And then you say, I guess this is just where I am. But this isn't where you are. It's who you are protecting. Let's talk about identity. Your identity is not what you say about yourself. It's what your nervous system considers normal. If you've spent years earning a certain amount, living at a certain level, surviving in a certain pattern, your brain builds familiarity around it. And familiarity feels safe. Even if it limits you. Your current income isn't just a number. It's a comfort zone. And comfort zones defend themselves. Here's how. When you earn more, you feel temporary excitement. Then pressure. Pressure to maintain it. Pressure to prove it. Pressure to live at that level consistently. And instead of stabilizing, you unconsciously destabilize. You increase spending. You take on new obligations. You relax your discipline. You tell yourself, I deserve this. But what you're really saying is, I'm not comfortable holding more yet. This is called financial homeostasis. Just like your body resists sudden temperature change, your identity resists sudden financial expansion. You return to baseline, because baseline feels safe. Let's go deeper. If your identity has been built around, I'm still figuring things out. I'm not a money person. I didn't grow up with much. I'm doing better than before. Then sudden wealth threatens that narrative, and identity is more important to the brain than income. Because income is external. Identity is psychological safety. If earning more requires becoming someone new, your mind hesitates. Because becoming someone new means letting go of who you've been. And that feels like loss. Even if who you've been is financially limited. Here's something uncomfortable. Some people don't sabotage money because they fear poverty. They sabotage money because they fear responsibility. More money means more decisions, more expectation, more accountability, less excuse. When you're financially average, you can blame timing. You can blame background. You can blame opportunity. When you have resources, you must manage them. And management exposes maturity. That exposure is threatening. So instead of rising, you protect your level. Let's look at this practically. If your income increased by 30% tomorrow, would your savings rate increase? Or your lifestyle? Be honest. If the first thought was, I could finally upgrade, that reveals your calibration. Upgrading feels natural. Investing feels restrained. Because restraint feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar feels unsafe. Identity is not logical. It is emotional. If you grew up hearing, money changes people. Rich people are arrogant. Don't get too ahead of yourself. Stay humble. Those phrases become internal ceilings. You may consciously desire wealth, but subconsciously fear what it represents. Visibility, judgment, separation, power. And power is intimidating if you were never trained to hold it. So instead of stepping into it, you soften yourself. You spend instead of invest. You delay instead of execute. You talk instead of position. Not because you lack intelligence, but because your identity pulls you back to familiar ground. Let me say this clearly. You are not where you are financially by accident. You are there because your internal thermostat is set there. And thermostats reset automatically. Until consciously changed. That means the first step is not earning more. It is expanding what feels normal. Normal to save aggressively. Normal to delay gratification. Normal to think in decades. Normal to hold pressure calmly. Normal to outgrow environments without guilt. If that feels uncomfortable, that's the point. Because growth always feels like instability at first. You are not protecting your income. You are protecting your self-image. And until that self-image evolves, your financial results will orbit the same level. Not because you lack ambition, but because you defend familiarity. So here's the question that matters. Who would you have to become to hold twice what you earn now? Calmer. More disciplined. Less reactive. Less concerned with validation. More comfortable being misunderstood. That version of you already exists. But you keep protecting the older one. The one that feels safe. The one that feels known. The one that doesn't threaten anyone. The one that doesn't require transformation. You don't need more opportunity. You need a higher tolerance for growth. Because wealth does not break people. It reveals them. And if you want to earn more, you must become someone who feels normal at that level. Not excited. Not overwhelmed. Normal. In the next chapter, we confront something even more uncomfortable. Why comfort is more addictive than failure. and why staying average feels safer than winning. Let's continue. Chapter 2. Comfort is more addictive than failure. Failure doesn't keep you average. Comfort does. Let that sit. Most people believe they're stuck because they're afraid of failing. That's not true. They're stuck because they're addicted to staying the same. Failure is dramatic. It hurts. It embarrasses you. It forces change. Comfort is quieter. It numbs you. It makes you feel fine. And fine is the most dangerous financial position you can live in. You're not desperate. You're not starving. You're not collapsing. You're just comfortable enough. And comfort kills urgency. But here's the twist. It doesn't kill the urgency to escape. It kills the urgency to transform. There's a difference. You want more money. But you don't want more discomfort. You want success. But you don't want instability. You want growth. But you don't want to outgrow your environment. Comfort becomes your compromise. You tell yourself, I'm doing okay. I'm better than I was. At least I'm not struggling. And slowly, okay becomes your ceiling. Let's go deeper. Comfort is addictive because it regulates your nervous system. Your brain prefers predictable income over uncertain expansion. Predictable bills. Predictable lifestyle. Predictable stress. Even predictable dissatisfaction. Because dissatisfaction you understand feels safer than transformation you don't. You don't hate being average. You hate being uncomfortable. And building wealth is uncomfortable. Saving aggressively feels restrictive. Investing feels uncertain. Delaying gratification feels painful. Outgrowing people feels isolating. Holding larger responsibility feels heavy. So instead of building upward, you stabilize sideways. You stay just successful enough to avoid panic, but not disciplined enough to build power. This is where most people live. In the middle. The middle feels safe. The middle feels socially acceptable. The middle doesn't threaten anyone. But the middle never compounds. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. If your life stayed exactly like this for the next 10 years, would you be proud? Or would you slowly resent yourself? Be honest. Because comfort today becomes regret tomorrow. And regret compounds faster than money ever will. Here's what nobody tells you. Comfort doesn't just stop growth. It rewires ambition. The longer you stay comfortable, the smaller your dreams become. You adjust. You rationalize. You lower the target. You tell yourself, I don't need that much. That's not important to me. I value peace. But sometimes what you call peace is disguised stagnation. Real peace comes from control, and control comes from structure. Comfort without structure is fragility. The moment pressure hits, you feel exposed. That's why comfort is more addictive than failure. Failure forces identity shift. Comfort lets you postpone it. Failure wakes you up. Comfort lulls you to sleep. Failure humiliates you into growth. Comfort whispers, "Stay here. It's safe." And safety feels good, until you realize you've been safe for years. Safe. Stable. Average. And average doesn't hurt enough to change. That's the trap. You don't need motivation. You need disruption. You need to disturb your own comfort. Because nothing changes while your nervous system feels satisfied. Let's talk practically. When you get a raise, do you immediately upgrade something? New apartment. New car. New subscriptions. New spending habits. That's comfort expanding, not wealth building. You widen your lifestyle, instead of widening your gap. The gap between what you earn and what you keep. That gap builds power. But power requires restraint, and restraint feels like loss. So you avoid it. You choose visible upgrades over invisible positioning, because upgrades feel rewarding. Investments feel delayed, and the brain prefers immediate relief over long-term leverage. Comfort trains you to prefer now over later. Wealth rewards later over now. That conflict is why most people stay stuck. You are not afraid of failing. You are afraid of disrupting your comfort. And disruption feels like threat. Threat to your routine. Threat to your identity. Threat to your social balance. Threat to your ego. So instead of risking instability, you choose stability without growth. Let me say something directly. You cannot build an extraordinary life while protecting an ordinary comfort zone. It's impossible. Comfort and compounding do not coexist. Compounding requires discipline. Discipline requires discomfort. Discomfort requires emotional maturity. And emotional maturity requires accepting that growth feels unstable at first. The wealthy are not superhuman. They simply tolerate discomfort longer. They delay gratification longer. They withstand isolation longer. They endure invisibility longer. And because they endure longer, they compound longer. Average people want excitement. Wealthy people want position. Excitement feels good today. Position builds power tomorrow. So here's the question. What comfort are you defending right now? The spending habits. The social environment. The predictable income level. The routine that feels safe. If you removed that comfort, who would you have to become? More disciplined, more structured, more patient, less reactive. That version of you feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar feels dangerous. But that's where growth lives. Comfort is not evil. It's just seductive. It convinces you that average is acceptable. That fine is enough. That later is guaranteed. But later is expensive. Every year you stay comfortable is a year compounding could have worked harder. In the next chapter, we go even deeper. Because sometimes it's not comfort alone that keeps you average. It's the fear of outgrowing the people around you. And that fear is powerful. Let's confront it. Chapter 3. The fear of outgrowing your environment. Nobody talks about this. but it silently controls financial ceilings. You don't just fear losing money. You fear losing people. Let's be honest. If you became significantly more disciplined, more structured, more financially serious, would your environment stay the same? Probably not. Growth changes dynamics. And humans are wired for belonging. Belonging feels safer than expansion. That's the conflict. You say you want wealth. But wealth shifts conversations. It shifts priorities. It shifts standards. It shifts tolerance. And not everyone around you grows at the same pace. So you slow down. Not consciously. Subtly. You hesitate to become too serious. You hesitate to invest aggressively. You hesitate to say no to lifestyle spending. You hesitate to distance yourself from mediocrity. Because distance feels like disloyalty. And disloyalty feels dangerous. Especially if your identity has always been tied to friend group approval, family expectations, cultural narratives about staying humble, or fear of being seen as arrogant. Let's go deeper. When someone in a group starts rising, there are reactions. Sometimes subtle, sometimes direct. You've changed. You think you're better? Relax, it's not that deep. Why are you always talking about money? Those comments don't feel hostile. They feel playful. But they send a message. Don't drift too far. Stay relatable. Stay normal. Stay like us. And because belonging is emotional safety, you recalibrate. You spend when they spend. You delay when they delay. You soften your ambition. You reduce your standards. You laugh off your seriousness. You tell yourself, I don't want to be that person. But that person might be the one who builds wealth. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Growth isolates before it stabilizes. When you raise standards, you temporarily feel alone. When you save aggressively, you feel misunderstood. When you invest consistently, you feel boring. When you choose discipline, you feel different. And different is uncomfortable. Especially if your entire life has been built around fitting in. Let me ask you something. If you became wealthy, who would feel threatened? Not because you changed, but because your growth exposes their stagnation. Success doesn't just elevate you. It reflects others. And not everyone likes that reflection. So you shrink. You soften your ambition to protect harmony. You cap your discipline to stay relatable. You choose comfort over contrast. Because being admired is easier than being isolated. But admiration doesn't compound. Discipline does. Let's look at something real. Many people don't sabotage wealth because they fear losing money. They sabotage wealth because they fear losing connection. And connection feels more urgent than capital. Especially if you grew up in an environment where money was scarce. But relationships were everything. You were taught. Stick together. Don't think you're above anyone. Stay grounded. But grounded and limited are not the same. You can remain humble without remaining small. But that distinction requires maturity. Here's where it gets even more subtle. If your environment celebrates consumption, and you choose investment, you will feel tension. If your environment celebrates appearances, and you choose positioning, you will feel tension. If your environment normalizes debt, and you choose structure, you will feel tension. Tension doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're diverging, and divergence is necessary for growth. You cannot become financially uncommon, while emotionally clinging to common standards. It doesn't work. Wealth requires higher thresholds, higher discipline, higher patience, higher discomfort tolerance, and sometimes higher isolation tolerance. Let's be clear. This doesn't mean abandoning people. It means refusing to shrink for comfort. There's a difference. Shrinking is self-sabotage disguised as loyalty. If your ambition must be hidden to be accepted, that environment has a ceiling, and ceilings limit compounding. Here's the deeper layer. Outgrowing people isn't always about income. It's about mindset. When you stop blaming, stop complaining, stop reacting, stop chasing urgency, you become calmer, more strategic, less emotionally volatile. And that calmness creates distance. Because average environments feed on emotional stimulation. Wealth environments feed on structure. So the question becomes, are you willing to be temporarily misunderstood? To be permanently elevated? Or do you prefer being permanently relatable and temporarily ambitious? That choice shapes your ceiling. You don't rise in isolation, but you do rise through discomfort. And sometimes the first discomfort is social. In the next chapter, we confront something even more confronting. You don't hate being broke. You hate responsibility. Let's go there. Chapter 4. You don't hate being broke. You hate responsibility. This one will sting, but only because it's true. Most people say they want more money. What they really want is less pressure. There's a difference. You think you hate being broke, but what you truly hate is being exposed. Because money doesn't just increase comfort. It increases responsibility. More money means more decisions, more accountability, more consequences, more visibility, more expectation. And responsibility is heavy. Let's break something down clearly. When you have little, you can blame a lot. The economy, your background, your timing, your boss, your environment. There are places to hide. But when you start building wealth, the hiding spots disappear. If you earn more and mismanage it, that's on you. If you invest poorly, that's on you. If you overspend, that's on you. If you waste opportunity, that's on you. Responsibility removes excuses, and excuses feel safer than exposure. That's why many people unconsciously sabotage growth. Because growth requires ownership. And ownership feels vulnerable. You can't complain and build at the same time. You can't blame and compound simultaneously. You can't play victim and investor. Those identities conflict. Let's go deeper. Money amplifies character. If you are disciplined, it expands discipline. If you are reactive, it expands reactivity. If you lack structure, it magnifies chaos. So when people say, "I'm not ready for more," sometimes they're right. Not financially, emotionally. Because more money will expose weaknesses. Weak budgeting, weak impulse control, weak long-term thinking, weak boundaries. And exposure is uncomfortable. It's easier to say, "I just need a better opportunity," than to say, "I need stronger habits." Here's something subtle. Responsibility feels like pressure. Pressure feels like stress. Stress feels threatening. So your brain chooses the level of income that matches your current emotional capacity. Not your ambition. Your capacity. If your emotional capacity is low, you will unconsciously cap your growth. Because growth brings complexity. Complexity requires maturity. Maturity requires emotional regulation. Let me ask you something direct. If your income doubled tomorrow, would your systems be ready? Would your discipline expand? Would your investing increase? Would your lifestyle stay stable? Or would spending accelerate? If spending accelerates faster than structure, you are not avoiding poverty. You are avoiding responsibility. Because responsibility says, allocate first. Position first. Build assets first. And that feels restrictive. It feels like loss. Loss of freedom. Loss of flexibility. Loss of impulse. But what you call freedom is often lack of structure. Real freedom is control. Control over time. Control over options. Control over decisions. And control is built through responsibility. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When people say they want financial freedom, many actually want financial relief. Relief from stress. Relief from bills. Relief from comparison. Relief from pressure. But relief is temporary. Responsibility is permanent. And wealth requires permanent responsibility. You don't just manage money. You manage risk. You manage opportunity. You manage patience. You manage ego. You manage fear. That's heavy. So instead of stepping into responsibility, you stay in aspiration. You listen. You learn. You plan. But you delay full ownership. Because once you own your results, you can't blame anything else. And ownership removes comfort. Ownership forces clarity. Let's go one level deeper. Some people stay financially average because average expectations are lower. When you're average, nobody expects leadership. Nobody expects structure. Nobody expects long-term thinking. Nobody expects composure under pressure. But when you build wealth, you must lead yourself. You must manage yourself. You must regulate yourself. That's why this chapter matters. Because the real barrier isn't money. It's identity. Are you the kind of person who handles pressure calmly? Are you the kind of person who delays gratification consistently? Are you the kind of person who can hold resources without reacting emotionally? If not, growth will feel unsafe. And when growth feels unsafe, you shrink. Not intentionally, protectively. You tell yourself you're not ready. You tell yourself it's not the right time. You tell yourself you need more knowledge. But deep down, you're avoiding exposure. Because money exposes who you are. And becoming someone stronger requires accepting responsibility before you feel ready. In the next chapter, we confront another silent trap, the validation trap. Because sometimes you don't want wealth. You want to look wealthy. And those two paths are very different. Let's go there. Perfect. Now we hit one of the most viral triggers in modern finance. This chapter must feel uncomfortable because it exposes behavior almost everyone recognizes. Let's go. Chapter 5. The validation trap. You don't always spend to enjoy. You spend to be seen. And that difference changes everything. Let's say something honest. A large percentage of financial decisions are not about utility. They're about perception. Not, do I need this? But, what does this say about me? The car. The apartment. The phone. The watch. The vacations. The dinners. The lifestyle posts. Most people are not building wealth. They're building image. And image feels powerful. For a moment. Because validation releases dopamine. You post something impressive. People react. You feel elevated. You upgrade something. People notice. You feel significant. But here's the trap. Validation is addictive. And addiction is expensive. Let's break this down psychologically. Humans crave status. Status signals safety. Status signals competence. Status signals belonging. In tribal environments, status increased survival. Today, status increases attention, and attention feels like power. So you unconsciously allocate money toward visibility, not leverage, toward impression, not assets, toward applause, not compounding. Because applause is immediate, compounding is silent. Let's ask something uncomfortable. Have you ever bought something, hoping someone specific would notice? That purchase wasn't about need. It was about narrative. You weren't buying the object. You were buying identity. I've made it. I'm progressing. I'm not behind. I'm doing well. But wealth doesn't require announcement. Only insecurity does. That's hard to hear. But it's real. When your identity depends on visible upgrades, you are emotionally dependent on perception. And perception fluctuates. Which means your financial behavior fluctuates too. The wealthy think differently. They prioritize position over performance. Performance is visible. Position is structural. Performance says, "Look at what I bought." Position says, "Look at what I own quietly." Performance consumes capital. Position compounds capital. Here's where it gets even more dangerous. Social media magnifies the validation trap. You don't just compare locally. You compare globally. You see someone younger earning more, someone traveling more, someone upgrading faster, someone winning publicly. Your brain registers threat, not logically, emotionally, and spending becomes defense. Defense against feeling behind. Defense against feeling average. Defense against invisibility. So you upgrade. Not because you need to, because you feel pressure to, and pressure erodes discipline. Now let's go deeper. Validation feels like power, but true power is independence from validation. If you need approval to feel successful, you are emotionally leveraged. And leveraged emotions make leveraged financial decisions. You overextend. You overspend. You overcommit. You overdisplay. Because display brings relief, but relief fades. So you repeat the cycle. This is how high earners stay broke. Income rises. Lifestyle rises. Validation rises. Savings stagnate. Assets stay weak. But appearance improves. And appearance is seductive. Let me ask you something directly. If nobody could see your purchases, would you still make the same ones? If no one could applaud your lifestyle, would you still maintain it? That answer reveals your psychology, because wealth is built in invisibility, in delayed gratification, in quiet positioning, in saying no when nobody would know, in allocating when nobody is watching. The validation trap is dangerous because it disguises itself as ambition. You tell yourself, I'm upgrading. I'm progressing. I'm leveling up. But upgrading lifestyle is not the same as upgrading net worth. Progress is not visual. It's structural. And structure is boring, which is why most people choose performance instead. Here's something powerful. When you are secure, you don't need to signal. When you are disciplined, you don't need to display. When you are positioned, you don't need applause, because your power is internal, not social. In the next chapter, we go even deeper, because validation doesn't operate alone. It operates alongside comparison. And comparison is one of the fastest ways to sabotage wealth quietly. Let's confront it. Chapter 6. The Comparison Spiral. Comparison used to be local. Now it's global. And that changed everything. There was a time when you compared yourself to your neighbors, your co-workers, your friends. Now you compare yourself to millionaires at 23, entrepreneurs at 19, investors posting six-figure gains, creators living in penthouses, and your brain doesn't process scale. It processes threat. Comparison is not inspiration. It is psychological pressure. And pressure without structure leads to reaction. Let's be honest. You don't feel broke because you are broke. You feel broke because you are comparing. Comparison distorts reality. You could be earning more than you ever have, saving more than last year, investing consistently. But one scroll, and suddenly you feel behind. That feeling is powerful, because behind activates urgency. Urgency activates impulse. Impulse activates bad decisions. This is the spiral. You see someone winning publicly. Your brain whispers, "You should be further." You're late. You're behind. You're not doing enough. And instead of building patiently, you accelerate emotionally. You chase faster returns. You upgrade to feel aligned. You stretch lifestyle. You enter investments late. You abandon strategy. Because comparison doesn't encourage discipline. It encourages speed. And speed without structure destroys capital. Let's go deeper. Comparison attacks identity. It makes you question your timeline. But timelines are individual. You don't see someone's starting point. You don't see their support system. You don't see inherited advantages. You don't see private failures. You see highlight reels, and you compare them to your daily reality. That's not fair. But your brain doesn't care about fairness. It reacts to visibility. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Have you ever made a financial decision, not because it aligned with your plan, but because you didn't want to feel behind? That's the spiral. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It slowly shifts your standards. It makes you impatient. And impatience is expensive. Here's something powerful. Comparison doesn't just affect spending. It affects ambition. When you constantly compare upward, you either chase aggressively, or shut down quietly. Some people overextend trying to keep up. Others shrink and tell themselves, "It's not worth it." Both reactions are emotional. Neither is strategic. The wealthy operate differently. They benchmark internally, not socially. They measure against their own systems, their own timelines, their own allocation rules, because wealth is not competitive in the short term. It is cumulative in the long term. Let's bring this into something practical. If your financial decisions change based on what you see online, you don't have a system. You have reactions. And reactions are unstable. Markets fluctuate. Trends rotate. Hype cycles repeat. If your confidence depends on what others post, your discipline will collapse repeatedly. Let's talk about something subtle. Comparison creates artificial urgency. You see someone succeed fast. You assume speed is normal. But what you don't see, the decade of preparation, the failures before visibility, the compounding before the breakthrough. Overnight success is rarely overnight. It is often invisible work finally surfacing, but your brain only sees the surface. So you demand acceleration. And acceleration increases risk exposure. Let me give you a grounding question. If social media disappeared tomorrow, would your financial plan change? If yes, you are building around perception, not structure. Wealth builders reduce comparison inputs. They limit noise. They protect focus. They avoid environments that distort their timeline. Because focus builds assets. Comparison builds anxiety. Anxiety builds reaction. Reaction destroys positioning. Now here's the deeper psychological layer. Comparison is not about money. It's about identity. When someone's success makes you uncomfortable, it's because it threatens your self-image. It suggests you could be further. That discomfort can motivate or destabilize. Without emotional control, it destabilizes. You don't need to eliminate comparison. You need to manage it. Observe it. Detach from it. Return to your system. Because systems protect you from emotional volatility. And volatility is not just market movement. It's internal movement. Chapter 7. The Fear of Visibility. You say you want wealth. But wealth makes you visible. And visibility feels dangerous. Let's sit with that. When you have nothing, you can move quietly. You can blend in. You can avoid expectation. You can stay unnoticed. But when you build something meaningful, people look. They observe. They judge. They question. They expect. And expectation feels heavy. Some people don't avoid wealth because they fear losing money. They avoid wealth because they fear being seen. Seen succeeding. Seen failing. Seen changing. Seen rising. Visibility removes invisibility. And invisibility feels safe. Let's break this down psychologically. If you grew up in an environment where standing out created pressure, you learned to shrink. If success created jealousy, you learned to dim. If attention brought criticism, you learned to stay small. Those patterns don't disappear when you grow older. They evolve. Now, instead of shrinking socially, you shrink financially. You don't aim too high. You don't scale too fast. You don't build too visibly. You don't step too far ahead. Because ahead means exposure. And exposure feels vulnerable. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. If you became financially successful, who would start watching you differently? Family, friends, colleagues. Would they expect support, advice, leadership, money? Would they question how you did it? Would they assume you changed? Visibility comes with projection, and projection feels heavy. It's easier to say, "I'm still figuring it out," than to say, "I've built something." Because once you've built something, there are no more hiding places. Let's go deeper. Wealth attracts scrutiny. People analyze how you spend, how you live, how you speak, how you invest. When you are average, nobody audits you. When you rise, everyone evaluates you. That evaluation triggers something primal. Fear of judgment. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being envied. Fear of being resented. So instead of stepping into higher visibility, you subconsciously cap your growth. You delay scaling. You avoid bold moves. You downplay wins. You undercharge. You underinvest. You stay just successful enough to survive, but not visible enough to attract attention, because attention feels risky. Here's the truth. Wealth increases responsibility publicly. If you speak about money and don't manage it well, people notice. If you claim growth and collapse, people notice. If you elevate and then retreat, people notice. And that potential embarrassment stops many before they begin. It's not the fear of losing money. It's the fear of losing image. Visibility forces integrity, and integrity requires alignment. Alignment requires maturity. Some people would rather stay hidden than evolve. Let's bring this into something practical. Have you ever held back from posting progress? Avoided raising your prices? Delayed launching something bigger? Minimized your ambition around others? Not because you couldn't do it, but because you didn't want attention? That's visibility fear. And it's subtle. It disguises itself as humility, as patience, as strategy. But underneath it is fear of being seen at a higher level. Here's something powerful. Wealth is not just financial expansion. It is exposure expansion. The more you grow, the more visible you become. The more visible you become, the stronger your character must be. Because visibility amplifies flaws. And many people know they're not disciplined enough yet. So instead of building discipline, they reduce ambition. That way they don't need to confront themselves publicly. Let me say something directly. You cannot build significant wealth quietly forever. At some point, growth changes your presence. It changes your standards. It changes your environment. It changes how people interact with you. And that change can feel isolating. But isolation is not punishment. It is transition. In the next chapter, we confront something even more subtle, the fear of losing it. Because sometimes, you don't sabotage success before you reach it. You sabotage it once it starts working. And that's where things get psychological. Let's go there. Chapter 8. The fear of losing it. Some people don't sabotage before they succeed. They sabotage once they start succeeding. And they don't even realize it. Let's say you begin building momentum. Income increases. Savings grow. Investments start compounding. Opportunities expand. Instead of confidence, you feel tension. Instead of stability, you feel anxiety. Instead of calm, you feel pressure. Why? Because growth introduces something unfamiliar. The possibility of loss. When you have little, losing doesn't feel catastrophic. When you start building something meaningful, losing feels terrifying. And fear of loss can be stronger than desire for gain. Psychologists call this loss aversion. The pain of losing $10,000 feels stronger than the joy of gaining $10,000. Now imagine building wealth for years and seeing volatility hit. Markets dip. Business slows. Investments fluctuate. Even if the fundamentals are intact, emotion spikes. and emotion drives reaction. Some people sell too early. Some overcorrect. Some overdiversify out of fear. Some withdraw into cash. Some abandon strategy entirely, not because logic changed, because fear increased. Let's use a real-world example. The 2008 financial crisis. Markets collapsed. Fear dominated headlines. Portfolios dropped sharply. Many investors sold at the bottom, not because they didn't believe in long-term recovery, because watching the decline felt unbearable. But those who held, recovered, and often multiplied. Same market, different emotional response. The disciplined tolerated temporary loss. The fearful locked in permanent loss. Fear didn't destroy wealth. Reaction did. Now let's go deeper. Fear of losing isn't just about money. It's about identity. When you build something meaningful, it becomes part of who you are. Your net worth becomes psychological worth. So when it fluctuates, you feel personally attacked. You don't just see a dip. You feel instability. That attachment is dangerous, because attachment increases panic. The wealthiest individuals think differently. They expect volatility. They anticipate downturns. They build margin. They separate identity from fluctuation. They don't see loss as proof of failure. They see it as part of the cycle. Let's bring in another real example. Tech founders. Early-stage companies experience massive volatility. Valuations surge, then crash, then recover. Some founders panic during downturns. They pivot impulsively. Cut vision prematurely. Chase investor approval. Others stay grounded. They understand cycles. They endure downturns without emotional collapse. The difference isn't intelligence. It's emotional tolerance. Now let's confront something uncomfortable. Have you ever pulled money out of an investment because it dipped? Avoided investing because you didn't want to risk it? Overreacted to short-term fluctuation? Delayed scaling because you were afraid to lose momentum? That's fear of losing, and it can sabotage progress quietly. There's another layer here. Sometimes people sabotage before they rise too high. They undercharge. They overspend once income rises. They create unnecessary expenses. They take reckless risks. Because subconsciously, they don't believe they can sustain success. If you've never held wealth before, it feels temporary. And when something feels temporary, you rush to experience it, instead of protecting it. This is why some athletes and entertainers lose fortunes quickly. Not because they didn't earn enough. Because they weren't emotionally prepared to hold it. Holding wealth requires calm. It requires detachment. It requires understanding that fluctuation is not catastrophe. Let's make something clear. Wealth is not built by avoiding risk. It is built by managing risk. Managing risk requires patience. Patience requires emotional regulation. And emotional regulation requires maturity. Here's the powerful shift. Instead of asking, "What if I lose it?" ask, How do I build resilience so loss doesn't destroy me? Because loss is inevitable. Market corrections happen. Economic cycles happen. Unexpected expenses happen. If your stability depends on perfect conditions, you are fragile. Wealth builders create buffers, emergency funds, diversification, long-time horizons, low emotional reactivity. They don't eliminate fear. They reduce its power. Let me ask you something. If your investments dropped 20% tomorrow, would you panic? Or would you stay positioned? Your answer reveals your readiness. Because fear of losing is not about money. It's about emotional capacity. In the next chapter, we confront something even deeper. The scarcity identity. The belief that there's never enough. And that belief silently controls behavior more than income ever could. Let's go there. Chapter 9. The scarcity identity. There are people who earn $40,000 and feel stable. There are people who earn $400,000 and feel anxious. The difference is not income. It's identity. Scarcity is not a bank balance. It's a lens. And if your identity is rooted in scarcity, no amount of money will feel enough. Let's start here. Scarcity says, there's not enough. Someone will take it. It won't last. I have to move fast. I can't relax. And when that belief becomes identity, it shapes every financial decision. Scarcity creates urgency. Urgency creates reaction. Reaction destroys structure. Let's go deeper. If you grew up in financial instability, scarcity may have been survival. Bills were tight. Opportunities felt limited. Security felt temporary. Your nervous system adapted. It learned to stay alert, to scan for danger, to act quickly. That survival mechanism helped you then. But now, it may be sabotaging you, because wealth requires calm. And scarcity is restless. Scarcity pushes you to spend before it disappears, grab before it's gone, chase before you're late, hold tightly out of fear. It makes saving feel risky. It makes investing feel threatening. It makes generosity feel dangerous. Because the identity says, if I let go, I won't recover. That belief is powerful and often unconscious. Let me ask you something. When you receive money, do you feel relief? Or do you feel pressure to move it quickly? If money feels like something that might vanish, you treat it differently. You rush to use it. Because you don't trust stability. And distrust erodes compounding. Let's bring in a real-world example. Lottery winners. Sudden wealth. No internal wealth identity. Many lose it within years. Not because they lacked opportunity, because their scarcity identity remained intact. If your identity says, money comes and goes, it will go. If your identity says, I need to experience this now, you will experience it now, but not protect it. Now let's look at generational wealth families. They don't just inherit assets. They inherit stability thinking, long-term planning, delayed gratification, multi-decade strategies, risk management. They think in decades. Scarcity thinks in days. That's the difference. Scarcity says, what if it runs out? Abundance says, how do I position this for growth? One reacts. The other allocates. Scarcity also creates comparison. If there's not enough, then someone else having more feels threatening. Instead of inspiration, you feel competition. Instead of calm, you feel pressure. And pressure distorts decisions. Scarcity identity often shows up like this. You undercharge because you fear losing clients. You overwork because you fear missing opportunity. You hoard cash but avoid investing. You hesitate to delegate because you fear losing control. You panic during downturns. You overextend during upswings. Everything feels fragile. Now let's go even deeper. Scarcity identity is not just about money. It's about self-worth. If you believe your worth is fragile, your finances will feel fragile. If you believe opportunities are rare, you will rush them. If you believe success is temporary, you will treat it like a short-term event. But wealth is not a short-term event. It is a long-term relationship. And relationships built on fear collapse. Here's something powerful. Scarcity makes you emotionally reactive. Abundance makes you strategically selective. Selective people build power. Reactive people chase it. Let's use another real-world moment. During economic downturns, some people panic and sell everything. Others calmly accumulate assets at lower prices. Same market, different identity. The scarcity investor sees collapse. The abundance investor sees opportunity. Which one builds more long-term wealth? The one who isn't emotionally hijacked. Scarcity is loud. It whispers constantly. Be careful. Move fast. Don't lose. Don't fall behind. But abundance is quieter. It says, build systems. Trust process. Zoom out. Think decades. Now here's the confronting question. If your income doubled tomorrow, would your anxiety reduce? Or would your expenses expand? If anxiety stays, income isn't the issue. Identity is. Scarcity identity also sabotages generosity. You hesitate to give. Hesitate to invest in yourself. Hesitate to take calculated risks. Because your mind is protecting survival. But survival thinking cannot build legacy. You cannot build abundance while emotionally loyal to lack. That loyalty must break. But breaking it feels unsafe. Because scarcity has been your protector. Let's shift perspective. Scarcity kept you alert. It kept you cautious. It kept you observant. But now you must evolve. Alertness must become strategy. Caution must become calculation. Observation must become allocation. Otherwise, you will always feel one step away from loss. Even when you're stable. Here's a grounding exercise. Ask yourself, Do I make decisions from fear of losing, or confidence in building? Do I rush because I'm afraid, or wait because I trust structure? Do I feel behind, or positioned? Those answers reveal your lens. Scarcity identity is powerful, but it is not permanent. It can be rewired through systems, through long-term thinking, through consistent allocation, through evidence of stability. You must prove to your nervous system that you are safe, not by spending, by structuring, because wealth is not emotional excitement. It is emotional stability, and stability is built slowly. In the next chapter, we confront something equally uncomfortable. Discipline feels like loss. And that emotional resistance is why most people never cross into real wealth. Let's go there. Chapter 10. Discipline feels like loss. Nobody struggles with discipline because they're incapable. They struggle because discipline feels painful. And not physically painful. Emotionally painful. When you choose discipline, you are choosing not to do something else. And the brain interprets that as loss. You choose to invest. You lose the chance to spend. You choose to save. You lose immediate pleasure. You choose to delay gratification. You lose instant validation. You choose to build quietly. You lose applause. That emotional friction is real. And most people never examine it. Let's break something down clearly. Your brain is wired for immediate reward. Dopamine spikes from anticipation. Scrolling, buying, upgrading, posting, celebrating. Those are short feedback loops. Investing, saving, compounding, automation. Those are long feedback loops. Long loops feel empty at first because the reward is invisible. So when you choose discipline, your brain feels deprived. Not because you are actually losing something, but because you are postponing stimulation. And postponement feels like loss. Let's go deeper. When you say no to an impulse purchase, there is a moment of discomfort. When you decline an expensive social outing, there is a moment of tension. When you skip upgrading your lifestyle, there is a moment of resistance. That moment is the growth zone. But most people interpret that moment as suffering. So they relieve it. They spend. They justify. They bend the rule. They treat themselves. And every time you relieve discipline tension with spending, you train your brain to associate discipline with pain. So discipline becomes something to avoid, instead of something to master. Let's use a real-world example. Look at high earners who still struggle financially. Doctors, athletes, entrepreneurs. Income is not the issue. Lifestyle discipline is. When income rises, expectations rise. And when expectations rise faster than structure, spending expands. Because saying no to expansion feels like loss. If you earn more but still live modestly, people question it. If you grow but don't upgrade visibly, it feels like you're missing out. That emotional pressure is real, and discipline means tolerating it. Let's say something powerful. Discipline is not about restriction. It is about prioritization. But prioritization requires saying no, and saying no always feels like loss. If you choose health, you lose junk food. If you choose strength, you lose comfort. If you choose wealth, you lose short-term indulgence. But loss is temporary. Positioning is permanent. The wealthy understand something critical. Discipline hurts today, but regret hurts longer. The pain of saving now is smaller than the pain of instability later. The pain of investing now is smaller than the pain of missed compounding. But the brain does not calculate long-term regret emotionally. It calculates short-term discomfort. So when you invest $5,000 instead of spending it, you feel the $5,000 leaving. You don't feel the future $50,000 growing. That invisible gap tests maturity. Now let's examine something even more subtle. Discipline feels like loss of identity. If you've always been spontaneous, discipline feels rigid. If you've always been generous to a fault, discipline feels selfish. If you've always been expressive with money, discipline feels restrained. So building wealth requires identity shift. An identity shift feels destabilizing. Let's bring in a grounded example. During market downturns, disciplined investors continue contributing. Even when fear rises, that discipline feels painful. You're investing while headlines scream collapse. Emotion says, stop. Structure says, continue. Choosing structure feels like emotional loss, but over decades, it compounds. The emotional investor seeks relief. The disciplined investor seeks position. One feels better today. The other builds security tomorrow. Here's another layer. Discipline requires consistency without applause. Nobody celebrates your automated investment. Nobody congratulates your emergency fund. Nobody applauds your diversified portfolio. Because discipline is invisible. And humans crave recognition. So some people unconsciously avoid discipline. Because it doesn't deliver social reward. But social reward doesn't build net worth. Structure does. Let's confront something directly. Have you ever told yourself, I'll start saving seriously next month. I'll invest once I feel stable. I'll tighten up after this trip. I'll build structure when things calm down. That delay is emotional avoidance. Because discipline feels restrictive. And restriction feels like loss. But here's the reframe. Discipline is not loss. It is leverage. Every dollar you allocate strategically works for you. Every dollar you impulse spend works against you. Every disciplined action strengthens identity. Every indulgent override weakens it. Identity compounds too. You don't just build assets. You build patterns. And patterns determine ceilings. Now let's go even deeper. Why does discipline feel especially painful in modern culture? Because culture celebrates display, upgrade, flex, show, travel, consume. Quiet restraint is not glamorous, but glamour fades. Compounding grows. Let's compare two lives. One person upgrades lifestyle every raise. Another person increases asset allocation every raise. 5 years later, the first feels successful. The second is becoming powerful. 10 years later, the first feels pressured. The second feels stable. 20 years later, the first wonders where the money went. The second controls options. The difference was not opportunity. It was emotional tolerance for discipline. Here's a powerful phrase to anchor this chapter. Discipline feels like loss until you understand leverage. When you understand leverage, you don't feel deprived. You feel strategic. Now let me ask you something honestly. When you say you want wealth, do you also want the discomfort required to build it? Because you cannot separate the two. If you want the outcome, you must accept the emotional friction. The wealthy are not more intelligent. They simply tolerate discipline tension longer. They delay relief longer. They say no more often. And because they say no more often, they say yes to freedom later. In the next chapter, we confront something that often overrides discipline completely. Urgency addiction. The need for speed. The craving for fast wins. And why chasing fast growth quietly destroys slow wealth. Let's go there. Chapter 11. You're addicted to urgency. You don't lack opportunity. You lack patience. And patience is uncomfortable in a culture addicted to speed. Let's say something direct. Urgency feels like progress, even when it isn't. When you move fast, when you act quickly, when you chase aggressively, you feel alive. You feel in motion. You feel ahead. But motion is not positioning. And urgency is not strategy. Urgency is emotional. Strategy is structured. Most people confuse the two. Let's break down what urgency addiction looks like. You check your investments daily. You switch strategies frequently. You chase trending assets. You pivot businesses too quickly. You jump into opportunities without full analysis. You exit positions early because growth feels too slow. You feel restless when nothing dramatic is happening. That restlessness is the addiction. Modern culture trains it into you. Fast growth stories. Overnight success. Viral wins. Crypto surges. Stock spikes. Quick flips. Everything is marketed as immediate, but compounding is slow. And slow feels like losing in a fast world. So you accelerate. And acceleration without structure increases risk. Let's use a real-world example. The dot-com bubble. Late 1990s. Internet stocks exploded. Valuations made no logical sense. But urgency dominated. Get in now. You're missing out. This is the future. People rushed. Not because they analyzed fundamentals. Because they felt behind. And feeling behind activates urgency. When the bubble burst, trillions evaporated. Not because the internet wasn't real. Because urgency replaced discipline. Let's bring it closer. Crypto cycles. Every bull market creates urgency. Stories of overnight millionaires. Massive returns in short windows. People enter at emotional highs. Why? Because waiting feels like loss. They don't want to miss the wave, but they ignore volatility. When corrections hit, fear replaces greed. They exit. Loss locked in. Same pattern. Different asset class. Urgency creates bubbles. Patience builds wealth. Now let's go deeper psychologically. Urgency feels powerful because it mimics control. When you act fast, you feel decisive. When you move quickly, you feel proactive. But sometimes speed is just fear in disguise. Fear of missing out. Fear of being behind. Fear of slow growth. Fear of not doing enough. So you move. But movement isn't mastery. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Have you ever made a financial decision just because you were tired of waiting? That's urgency addiction. Waiting feels uncomfortable. Waiting feels like stagnation. But waiting strategically is compounding. You don't see roots growing. But roots are what hold the tree. Wealth grows underground first. Here's another layer. Urgency makes you reactive. Headlines move you. Market dips scare you. Trends excite you. Conversations influence you. Your financial behavior becomes externally controlled. That's fragile. The disciplined investor builds internal filters. Before acting, they ask, does this align with my plan? Does this fit my allocation? Does this serve my long-term vision? If not, they wait. Waiting feels passive, but waiting is powerful. Now let's examine urgency in income. Some people constantly chase the next opportunity. New side hustle. New investment. New business idea. New shortcut. Not because they lack potential, because they can't tolerate slow progress. They abandon compounding halfway. They reset before momentum builds. They pivot before leverage accumulates. Imagine planting a seed, watering it for 3 months, then digging it up to check if it's growing. That's urgency behavior. Growth requires trust in process. But trust requires emotional maturity. Here's something powerful. Most people overestimate what they can achieve in 1 year and underestimate what they can build in 10. Urgency focuses on 1-year wins. Wealth focuses on decade positioning. Let's bring in another real example. Warren Buffett didn't become a billionaire through speed. He compounded steadily over decades. His net worth exploded later in life. Not because he accelerated, because he endured. Compounding takes time to become visible, and urgency prevents time from working for you. Now let's talk about ego. Urgency feeds ego. Fast wins impress. Slow growth doesn't. So people chase fast results for validation. But validation fades, and capital shrinks. The wealthy don't chase speed. They chase sustainability. Sustainability compounds. Speed collapses. Let's examine something subtle. If nothing dramatic is happening in your financial life, do you feel bored? Do you feel like you're not doing enough? That discomfort is urgency withdrawal. Calm is unfamiliar. But calm is where wealth stabilizes. Here's a grounding truth. If your strategy requires constant excitement, it is unstable. If your strategy works quietly, it is powerful. The most dangerous sentence in finance is, "I need to make this happen now." Because now rarely aligns with compounding. Compounding aligns with consistency, patience, margin, repetition. Urgency eliminates margin. It compresses timelines. It increases risk. It narrows thinking. Now let's flip the perspective. Strategic acceleration exists. It's not reckless. It's calculated. It's researched. It's supported by data. It respects downside risk. Urgency ignores downside. Chapter 12. Rebuilding your wealth identity. Everything you've heard so far leads here. Not tactics. Not strategies. Not markets. Identity. Because money does not rise above identity for long. You can earn more than you're prepared for. You can inherit more than you understand. You can win more than you're disciplined enough to hold. But you cannot sustain more than your identity can manage. Wealth is not a financial ceiling problem. It is an identity ceiling problem. And identity is invisible. It shows up in patterns. How you react to volatility. How you behave after income increases. How you allocate unexpected money. How you respond to pressure. How you tolerate boredom. How you handle visibility. How you manage responsibility. That is your financial identity. Let's ask something powerful. Who are you when money enters your life? Calm. Reactive. Strategic. Emotional. Disciplined. Impulsive. Avoidant. Your answer matters more than your income, because income amplifies identity. If you are structured, more income strengthens structure. If you are reactive, more income magnifies reaction. This is why some people scale smoothly, and others collapse under growth. The money didn't change them. It revealed them. So rebuilding your wealth identity requires honesty, not ambition. Honesty. Let's begin here. You must separate self-worth from net worth. If your value rises and falls with your portfolio, you will make emotional decisions. If your worth is stable, your allocation becomes stable. That stability compounds. Next shift. You must redefine what success feels like. Right now, success may feel like upgrading, visible growth, external validation, speed, momentum. But wealth identity reframes success as consistency, calm, control, optionality, margin. Margin is power. Power is freedom. Freedom is stability. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Now let's talk about systems. Emotion fluctuates. Systems stabilize. Wealth identity says, I don't rely on motivation. I rely on structure. Automated investing. Predefined allocation rules. Spending thresholds. emergency buffers, long-term planning. Systems protect you from yourself, and maturity means accepting that protection is necessary. Next shift. Time horizon. Scarcity identity thinks in weeks. Urgency identity thinks in months. Wealth identity thinks in decades. Decades remove panic. Decades remove comparison. Decades reduce volatility emotionally. When you zoom out far enough, short-term fluctuations lose power. The wealthy don't react to noise. They adjust only to structural change. Now let's bring in a real-world example. Consider generational wealth families. They don't build thinking about 1 quarter. They think about 30 years. Estate planning, trust structures, diversified portfolios, risk buffers. That mindset is identity-based. They see wealth as stewardship, not stimulation. Stewardship changes behavior. If you see money as something to experience, you consume it. If you see money as something to manage, you position it. Positioning compounds. Now let's talk about emotional neutrality. You must become boring under pressure. Calm when markets dip. Steady when income rises. Measured when opportunities appear. Detached from hype. Detached from panic. This is not coldness. It's control. Control is power. Most people seek power through income, but real power is self-regulation. If you can regulate emotion, you can regulate allocation. If you regulate allocation, you regulate trajectory. Now let's confront something uncomfortable. You cannot build wealth while protecting your old identity. If you still identify as the impulsive one, the generous spender, the risk avoider, the late starter, the unlucky one, the one who struggles. Those labels create ceilings. You must replace them with, I am disciplined, I am structured, I am long-term, I am strategic, I am calm under pressure, I allocate before I consume. Identity is repetition. The more you act in alignment, the more identity stabilizes. You don't wake up wealthy. You wake up consistent. And consistency builds wealth. Now let's talk about environment. Identity is reinforced socially. If your environment glorifies spending, it weakens structure. If your environment normalizes debt, it weakens discipline. If your environment dismisses investing, it weakens compounding. You must audit your inputs, not just financial inputs, psychological inputs. What do you consume daily? Who do you listen to? Who influences your urgency? Who normalizes instability? Wealth identity requires intentional exposure. Now here's a powerful shift. You must detach wealth from emotion. Money is neutral. It is not safety. It is not identity. It is not validation. It is leverage. When you see money as leverage, you stop reacting to it emotionally. You start directing it strategically. Now let's ask something deeper. If your income doubled tomorrow, Would your behavior change? Or would your structure hold? If your lifestyle immediately expands, your identity is fragile. If your allocation expands first, your identity is evolving. The goal is not to earn more. The goal is to become someone who can hold more. Holding requires emotional regulation, long-term thinking, clear allocation systems, margin for error, detachment from validation, tolerance for boredom, patience during volatility. That is wealth identity. And once that identity stabilizes, money becomes a byproduct, not the goal. Here's the final reframe. Stop asking, "How do I get rich?" Start asking, "Who do I need to become to hold wealth?" Because when identity shifts, income follows. When discipline stabilizes, assets grow. When emotion quiets, compounding accelerates. And when you become internally unshakable, external fluctuation loses power. Wealth is not built by what you earn. It is built by who you become. And becoming requires responsibility. It requires maturity. It requires choosing structure over stimulation. It requires choosing patience over urgency. It requires choosing positioning over applause. Now the question is not, can you earn more? The question is, can you hold more? Because if you can hold it, you can build it. And if you can build it, you can sustain it. And if you can sustain it, you are no longer chasing wealth. You are embodying it. If this message spoke to you, share it. Subscribe. Keep listening. This is Beyond the Noise Studio.